Good day, mates. My name is Mordecai, and welcome back to the show, where an aspiring roleplayer narrates various RPG-related stories as a learning tool. I am speaking through my familiar Aquata for this narration. When it comes to attempting to perform a presumably difficult task in character during play at the table, we often use dice to determine if and how successfully that task is accomplished. Picking locks, recalling information on various plants and monsters, or making an attack against a hostile in combat, we use dice rolls to simulate the attempt to overcome the difficulty behind the action. Sometimes it can seem extremely daunting to make that one crucial dice roll upon which everything in the game depends. It is often used in equal measure by both the Dungeon Master and the players, depending on what system is being used at the table. So what happens when we have a player who is faced with a dire moment, a situation in which a dice roll might be necessary for success, but refuses to make any attempt to escape from that dire situation? Let us find out as we embark on another delve. Before we begin with today's story, if you like my content and want to see more, feel free to subscribe and like the video. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Plus, you can always change your mind at a later date. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Today's narrative is titled Player Quits Because Odds Are Not Good Enough, and is written by user Ander the Reckoning. Disclaimer: this isn't a proper horror story. There is no real horror, and no party involved can be said to be entirely at fault. Yet, this short incident is something I feel this subreddit might like, so here we go. Context: some years ago, I answered an ad for a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game online. Me, being a huge Warhammer nerd and knowing the setting better than the back of my own hand, I immediately applied. So this was a game that happened with people I never met before, and we were playing online through Roll20. The cast is not that important, although I will let it be known that there were just the 4 players, which I will refer to by their race: the elf, the dwarf, myself, and the wizard, who is the protagonist of this merry little story, and an acquaintance of the GM's. Now, before we start, I need to tell you that the wizard had some kind of unspecified condition, although I never asked for details on what that was. He was extremely socially awkward, but also incredibly smart when concerning numbers. He had this habit of mentally calculating the odd of success before each roll. If the odds were not good enough, though, he would not take any action. Was this impressive? Absolutely. But also, it was terribly grating when you're fighting goblins or climbing a wall, and he would spend 10 minutes thinking, and then say something along the lines of, "The odds are not good enough. I do nothing." The smart among you already know where this is going.
Statement: apathy is death.
Oh no. So, 3 sessions in, and our merry party is running away from a horde of greenskins. Normally we would stand and fight, but those particular hostiles tend to charge you 5 to 1, and this is not Dungeons and Dragons. A single jab with a stick can end your character very quickly. So we are running, and end up on a bridge over a fast-flowing river. But uh-oh, look out! The bridge has collapsed at its center, and now a wide gap sits between us and safety. We have very little time to decide what to do, but the next move we need to do is rather clear. We have to jump. The elf went first, and he, being an elf, since elves have pretty overpowered stats in the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing system, easily passes the skill check. Our dwarf goes next, after the usual "nobody tosses a dwarf" shenanigans. He failed his roll, but help from the elf on the other side allows him to get to safety. Next was the wizard. We wanted to let him go first, but he refused because he needed a moment. Now his time has come. Either jump or get eaten by orcs. He muses over it for a few seconds, and then, with a tone as flat as a table, says, "The odds are not good enough. I do nothing." We are speechless. We assumed that, faced with either action or destruction, that the wizard would choose to act. Oh, what fools we were. When we pressed the fact that if he does nothing, his character will most certainly die, the wizard still states that the odds are too low to be acceptable, and that he would die anyway. We go back and forth for a while, enough for the fun to be spoiled, and for the session to come to a screeching halt. Then, maybe at fault on my own part, I lose my temper and my patience. GM, I toss the wizard. "What? You can't do that. I don't want to jump. I can't make it." I grapple the wizard and try to throw him over the bridge. Can I do that, GM? I don't know. Go for it. We roll for grapple. Now, I admit, I got very lucky during the process of character generation, because I rolled very good stats for my acolyte, and since I wanted to eventually advance to being a warrior priest, my strength was pretty high. The wizard, on the other hand, had very high mental stats, but very poor physical ones, so I was able to easily win the contested roll. After that, despite the wizard protesting that there is no way it will work, I yeet his character onto the other side of the bridge. He's forced to roll a skill check, which he refuses to, so the Dungeon Master has to roll for him. Through the Dungeon Master's roll, he succeeds. But more than that, the roll was so good, he would have succeeded even without my or the elf's help. I immediately jump behind him and am barely able to make it. As soon as we land, the dwarf, being a stonkingly good miner with a background as a mason, figures out a weak point on the bridge to strike with his pickaxe, causing some of it to fall into the river below, and widening the gap enough that the orcs could not cross as easily as we did, assuming that they made the attempt. Everyone is happy. Virtual high fives are given all around, except for the wizard, who had muted himself immediately after he had crossed the bridge. Right after the GM decided to call it a night, he unmutes himself and states, "This game is stupid!" and leaves the group. Days later, I learned from the GM that the wizard was very upset with the fact that, statistically, he shouldn't have been able to cross that bridge, and that we robbed him of player agency by forcing him to do so. Basically, he was furious that we acted in a suboptimal way, in his view, and could not accept the fact that the game rewarded us for it. The game continued for a while afterwards, but quickly petered out, since it left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. I still have no idea what to make out of this experience. It feels like a fever dream every time I think about it. A small editor's note. Since some people were discussing why the wizard was willing to choose death instead of going with the suboptimal choice, I don't really know. But at the moment, my idea is that in his reasoning, the wizard never considered the fact that if he didn't jump over the gap in the bridge, that he would die. I don't think he could see, or wanted to see, the correlation between the horde chasing us and the obstacle posed by the broken bridge. And that's where the story ends. With this story, there is a fair amount to consider when it comes to the aspect of rolling dice and the nature of luck. Considering the overall prominence of dice rolling to overcome problems during skill checks or even combat, I do have to wonder why the wizard was insistent on seemingly arbitrarily deciding what rolls were and were not worth rolling. Sometimes you will fail on a dice roll, even if the odds are overwhelmingly stacked in your favour. And there is a certain joy to taking even those seemingly slim chances to succeed, in defying the odds with a successful gambit, a joy that the wizard is sadly depriving themselves of by not even trying, especially when the situation called for it. There is a certain thrill to the uncertainty of rolling dice in the attempt to beat unfavourable odds in accomplishing some goal. However, I do have to point out that the wizard being upset with having their player agency robbed is a valid criticism, and unfortunately, the wizard did put the party in a position such that they had to make that choice for the wizard. Otherwise, he was certainly going to die at the hands of the goblin or orc horde. And no, I do not understand why the wizard seemingly preferred the certainty of death, as opposed to at least making an attempt at living by jumping over the broken bridge. I do have to wonder why the wizard didn't seriously consider what would happen if he did nothing. In the words of the illusion of the character Kreia from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2,
"So you will do nothing? Apathy is death, worse than death, because at least a rotting corpse feeds the beasts and insects."
And unfortunately, if the wizard was allowed to continue with his inaction, it could have dragged the rest of the party into an inescapable situation. A consideration from this story is that even if the odds are low, failure is certain without making an attempt at the task at hand. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed my content and would like to see more, feel free to subscribe and give the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Plus, you can always change your mind at a later date. Thank you again for watching, and I shall see you all next time.